Sadist. I mean, it is a name that just hits you right in the face right off the bat, doesn't it?
Or absolutely. It definitely projects a certain image. It feels almost like a warning label on the record.
Yeah, you see that band name on a festival poster or maybe scrawled on a bathroom stall at a dive bar somewhere, and your brain immediately shortcuts to a very specific, very aggressive place.
Right. It screams generic, brutal metal before you even press play. You expect leather, chains.
Probably some standard issue slasher movie lyrics, yeah.
Exactly. Music that is just pure, unadulterated noise.
Which is exactly what you'd think. It feels like you know exactly what you're getting. But, and this is why I absolutely love doing these deep dives, if you judge this particular book by its cover or its band logo, you are going to miss out on one of the strangest, most technically complex musical journeys in European history.
It really is a journey. We are definitely not talking about 3 chords and a scream here.
No, not at all. We are talking about a band that started in Genoa, Italy, way back in 1991, and has somehow managed to survive for over 3 decades by being absolute musical shapeshifters.
Shapeshifters is the perfect word for them. When we look at the source material for today, which, by the way, covers their entire discography, all their major lineup changes, and recent historical data right up to early 2026, we are looking at a band that looked at death metal and decided to basically break all the rules.
Right, because death metal is usually about speed, heaviness, just pure aggression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they decided to smash it together with 1970s progressive rock, and then later on, they took a weird detour into nu metal.
Oh, we have to talk about the nu metal era.
We will. And then they got obsessed with African tribal rhythms, and then they made an entire album about Alfred Hitchcock movies.
It's a wild ride. And the mission for today's deep dive is simple. We are going to figure out how this band, led by the only constant member, the multi-instrumentalist Tommy Talamanca, navigated 35 years of chaos to release their 10th studio album just last year.
We need to unpack the music and those really weird decisions.
We do, and we definitely need to talk about the massive controversy that clouded their legacy just recently in 2025.
But underneath all of that, we have to talk about the technical precision. That is really the thread that holds all these different eras together.
Yeah.
It is not just noise. It's closer to jazz fusion in terms of complexity, just, played with high-gain distortion.
So let's rewind the tape. Let's go back. We are in Genoa, Italy. It's 1991. Now, when I think of 1991 metal, I think of Florida.
Oh, the American scene.
Right. I think of Morbid Angel, Death, Obituary. The American scene was completely exploding. But Italy had its own flavor brewing entirely.
It did. And you have Tommy Talamanca, who plays guitar and keyboards, teaming up with a drummer named Marco Pezzenti.
Better known as Peso, right?
Right, Peso.
Yeah.
And Peso was already a known quantity in the underground because he had just left the band Necrodeath to start this new project.
Which was a big deal.
It was a massive deal locally. Necrodeath was a cult band, very raw, very thrashy. So when he teamed up with Talamanca, the local scene was basically expecting Necrodeath Part 2.
They wanted fast, angry thrash.
Exactly. But Talamanca had a completely different vision. He wasn't interested in just playing fast. He wanted to mix the brutality of death metal with the complexity of progressive rock and the aggression of thrash metal.
Which, on paper, sounds like a train wreck waiting to happen.
It really
It
does.
sounds like mixing oil and water. But they make it work. They grab a bassist, Andy Marchini, and a vocalist, Fabio Bacchiti, and they just start hustling. They record a demo, they get signed to a small indie label called Obscure Plasma Records, and they drop their debut EP, Black Screams, in 1991.
And that EP is significant because it established their blueprint immediately. It wasn't just heavy, it had texture.
Yeah, texture is a great way to put it.
And that texture got them noticed. By 1993, they secured a 2-album deal with Nosferatu Records and released their first full-length, Above the Medecan.
And looking at the touring schedule from that era, you can really tell they were hungry. They weren't just staying in Italy, eating pasta and jamming in the garage on weekends. They were grinding.
They were on the road constantly.
Yeah, they were touring France, the Netherlands, and they were landing some serious support slots. We are talking about opening for Carcass during the Heartwork Tour in 1994.
That is a huge endorsement.
It's massive.
For context for the listener, Carcass in 1994 was untouchable. Their album Heartwork is widely considered one of the greatest melodic death metal albums ever made.
Yeah.
If you are opening for Carcass on that tour, you cannot suck. You will get booed off the stage immediately if you can't play.
And they could play. They could definitely play. But the real breakthrough, the moment where they really found their sound, seems to be the second album, Tribe.
Absolutely. Tribe, which was released in 1996, is often cited as a true landmark for them. This wasn't just an Italian release anymore. It was distributed by Sunrising in Europe and, crucially, Toys Factory in Japan.
Japan is such a key piece of the puzzle here, isn't it?
It is.
The Japanese market has always had a huge appetite for technical proficiency. If you can shred, if you can play 1,000,000 notes a minute with absolute precision, Japan will embrace you.
Precisely. And Tribe showcased Talamanca's vision perfectly. They even had a music video for the title track that got broadcast all over Europe.
Which was huge for extreme metal back then.
Very rare. But what's fascinating here is how they utilized keyboards. In American death metal of the mid-90s, keyboards were often seen as soft, or they were just used for spooky intros.
Right, like a little cheap horror movie atmosphere before the real guitars kicked in.
Yes, but Sadist used them as a lead instrument, actually trading blows with the guitar.
It definitely gave them that specific Italian sound. It wasn't just brutal, it was elegant. And speaking of getting noticed, in late 96, they even ended up on an Iron Maiden tribute album covering Wrathchild.
Which is a badge of honor for any metal band.
It is. But, as we so often see in these deep dives, just as a band hits their stride, the lineup instability kicks in. It is the classic curse.
It really is the curse of the ambitious band. Right after Tribe, the drummer, Queso, the guy who helped start the band, leaves to reform his old band in Necrodeath.
Ouch.
And then the singer, Xana, who had already replaced the first guy, gets replaced by Trevor Nadir. It becomes a revolving door.
And yet they kept pushing. They released Crust in 1997, they signed to Displeased Records, and they even played Wacken Open Air in Germany in 1998. Wacken is the holy grail of metal festivals. So up until 1998, the trajectory is completely upward. They are technical, they are respected, they are growing.
They are doing everything right.
Okay, let's unpack this next part, because this is where the story takes a massive, highly controversial turn. We get to the year 2000, and the album is called Lego.
Lego. Even the name feels, I don't know, blocky.
It does.
It is a controversial chapter, to say the very least.
For context, think about what was happening in heavy music globally in the late 90s and the year 2000. It was not technical death metal. It was the era of the red Yankees cap. Korn, Limp Bizkit, Slipknot. Nu metal was the king of the world. Down-tuned guitars, rapping, baggy pants. And Sadist, well, they decided to join the party.
It was a very distinct shift. They produced Lego themselves at Talamanca's Nadir recording studios. The complex, progressive structures that they were known for were totally stripped back. The sound became groovier, simpler, more jumpy. It was very clearly influenced by the nu metal explosion.
And the fans hated it.
Not as favorable as the polite phrasing used in the history books, but yes. Yes, they did.
Wow.
It completely alienated their core audience. The people who loved them for their technical wizardry and their progressive influences felt betrayed.
And on the flip side, the nu metal kids didn't really care because, well, why would they listen to an Italian death metal band trying to adapt? It just didn't feel authentic.
No, it felt like trend chasing.
It is that classic risk. Do you stick to your roots and stay small, or do you chase the massive trend and risk losing absolutely everyone? In this case, the gamble failed. And it failed so hard that the band actually went on hiatus. They just stopped.
But, you know, sometimes a failure like that is necessary.
You think so?
I do. It forces a reset. If they just kept churning out mediocre nu metal albums to try and catch a wave that was already cresting, they would have faded into total obscurity. Instead, they stepped away. For 5 years, Sadist essentially didn't exist.
But you cannot keep a good musician down. Fast forward to 2005, they reform, they sign with Beyond Productions, and they get back to work. And when they come back with the self-titled album Sadist in 2007, it genuinely feels like an apology letter to the fans.
It was a massive return to form, but with a new maturity. And there is a detail on that 2007 album that I think is brilliant. They featured a guest appearance by Claudio Simonetti.
Wait, Claudio Simonetti from Goblin, the band that did the soundtrack for Suspiria and Dawn of the Dead.
The very same.
That is incredible.
And this is exactly why I mentioned the Italian sound earlier.
Yeah.
Italian progressive rock and Italian horror cinema are deeply intertwined. Goblin is absolute royalty in that world.
Right.
So by bringing Simonetti onto a death metal album, Sadist was explicitly connecting their extreme sound with that atmospheric cinematic heritage of their home country. It grounded them. It essentially said, We aren't chasing American trends anymore. We are doubling down on being Italian.
That is such a cool connection. It turns the music into something way more than just heavy metal. It becomes atmospheric storytelling. It is like they finally realized their strength wasn't in copying Limp Bizkit, but in channeling Suspiria.
Exactly.
And speaking of storytelling, their post-reunion era is just full of these wild, creative left turns.
They certainly stopped playing it safe. They started treating every album like a unique art project. Take Season in Silence in 2010, for example.
Right, but here's where it gets really interesting. In 2015, they released an album called Hyaena. Now, usually metal bands might look to classical music or maybe Norse folk music for inspiration. But Sadist, they looked to Africa.
It was a profoundly bold move. Hyaena was inspired by African rhythms and mythology. And they didn't just slap a digital sample on it and call it a day. They actually worked with a Senegalese percussionist named Jean Ndiaye.
Can we just pause and appreciate how unusual that is? You have Tommy Talamanca shredding on electric guitar, Trevor Nadir doing brutal death metal growls, and then actual Senegalese percussion weaving through all of it. How does that not sound like a total mess?
It works entirely because of polyrhythms.
Okay. Explain that to us. What exactly is a polyrhythm?
Simply put, it is when you have two different rhythms playing at the exact same time. So imagine your left hand tapping a steady 4-beat pattern on your desk, while your right hand taps a 3-beat pattern against it.
Right.
It creates this complex rolling feel. Now, progressive metal is all about complex time signatures. But African drumming is the actual origin of complex polyrhythms.
Ah, I see.
So musically, it was actually a perfect natural fit.
Yeah.
It added this primal hypnotic layer to the metal that you just do not hear elsewhere. It proved they were willing to experiment without dumbing down the sound like they did back with Lego.
That is fascinating. So instead of simplifying to try and be catchy, they actually made the music more complex, but they did it using a completely different musical vocabulary.
Exactly.
And then, just to keep us on our toes, the next album in 2018, Spellbound, is entirely dedicated to Alfred Hitchcock movies.
Yes, the cinematic obsession comes full circle. Every single song on Spellbound references a Hitchcock film or character. They have tracks referencing the Mountain Eagle and other deep cuts.
I love that.
It showcases their love for suspense and atmosphere. They aren't just writing songs, they're creating soundscapes.
It really gives you a reason to sit down and listen to the whole album, not just skip through the singles. Now bring us into the modern era. We are looking at the period from 2019 through to early 2026. What defines Sadist today?
The defining characteristic of modern Sadist is high-level musicianship, specifically regarding two instruments, the keyboards and the bass.
We mentioned earlier that Talamanca plays both guitar and keys, but in the studio, he is layering them constantly, right?
Correct. He creates this massive wall of sound where you sometimes actually cannot tell where the guitar ends and the synthesizer begins, but the bass, that is the secret sauce. Sadist has a long, dedicated history with the fretless bass.
For the listener who might not be a musician, why does fretless matter? A bass is a bass, right?
Not quite. So a standard bass guitar has those little metal bars that separate the notes on the neck. When you press down and play a note, it is precise. It is locked in. It's either a C or a C sharp. A fretless bass, much like a violin or a cello, has a completely smooth neck.
Okay.
This allows the player to actually slide between notes.
So you get that distinctive kind of mwah sound.
Exactly. It sings. It sounds almost liquid. Now, in standard death metal, the bass is usually just a rhythmic, metallic, clanking noise buried under the kick drums.
Just adding low-end rumble.
Right. But in Sadist, because they use fretless bass played by original member Andy Martini for years, and later by the absolute virtuoso Jero and Paul Fesseling on the Firescorch album, the bass acts as a primary melodic voice. It adds a jazz fusion elegance to the brutality.
That singing quality really does cut right through the mix. It makes it sound sophisticated, almost expensive in a way. So they released Firescorched in May 2022, which was a massive hit with the critics. And then, jumping to the very recent past, they announced their 10th studio album, Something to Pierce, which dropped on March 7, 2025.
10 albums. That is a massive milestone for any band, especially one in a genre this extreme and niche. It proves their absolute longevity.
But, and there is always a but in the music industry, 2025 wasn't just a celebration of new music. We have to talk about the summer of 2025.
We do, and this raises a very important question about the responsibility of artists in a polarized world.
So here are the facts exactly as we have them in the sources.
Yeah.
In the summer of 2025, Sadist announced they were going to perform in Russia in November of that year.
And obviously, given the geopolitical climate of the mid-2020s, the sanctions, the isolation, the ongoing conflicts, that is a decision that carries incredibly heavy weight. You don't just accidentally book a tour there in 2025.
No, you don't. Immediately, there was a huge backlash. The media headlines were things like Sadist in hot water, and fans were erupting on social media. It wasn't just a few angry comments on a post. It was a full-blown PR crisis.
And the band's response was short and very specific. They officially stated that they were apolitical.
So what does this all actually mean for a band's legacy? When a band says they are apolitical while actively booking a tour in a country that is heavily sanctioned and isolated, is that a valid defense anymore?
Well, we are looking at the tension between the pure artist ideal and the harsh reality of the world. The band likely views themselves as musicians who just want to play for their fans, regardless of what government those fans live under. They see music as a bridge. Or perhaps they just see it as a job. They are a niche band, they need to tour to survive and pay the bills. They might genuinely believe that their music exists outside of borders.
Right, but the critics argued that by physically going there, they are inherently making a political statement, whether they want to or not. One headline even said they forgot the world still has internet.
Exactly. In the 1980s or 90s, metal bands played everywhere and often claimed total ignorance of the local politics. It was almost a badge of honor to just play the music and ignore the news.
Yeah.
But in 2025, claiming to be apolitical is seen by many people not as neutrality, but as willful blindness. Now, we aren't taking a side on whether they should or shouldn't have gone. Our job is just to look at the data.
Right, absolutely.
And we can objectively say that the apolitical shield just doesn't work the way it used to. It simply didn't stop the backlash.
It certainly didn't. And it leaves a bit of a weird mark on what really should have been a celebratory year for their 10th album.
It complicates the legacy, for sure. You have the musical brilliance on one side, the fretless bass, the African rhythms, the Hitchcock themes, and then you have this modern moment of being seemingly completely out of touch with the global sentiment.
It is a messy ending to our timeline, but honestly, maybe that fits. Sadist has never really done things the easy or clean way. From day one, mixing prog and death metal, they have always been swimming upstream.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Sadist's career is almost a mirror of the metal scene itself. It started with youthful aggression in the 90s, went through a total identity crisis with nu metal in the 2000s, found a sophisticated artistic renaissance in the 2010s, and is now navigating the absolute minefield of modern ethics and politics in the 2020s.
That is a perfect way to summarize it. From black screams in a basement in Genoa to international controversies and 10 full studio albums.
They are survivors. And whether you love the African jazz fusion death metal or absolutely hate the nu metal experiments, you have to respect the sheer tenacity of Tommy Talamanca. He kept the ship sailing through waters that would have sunk almost any other band.
Absolutely. So if you are listening to this right now and you have never heard a single note of Sadist, where should you start?
I would suggest starting with Tribe if you want that classic 90s sound. But if you want to hear what makes them truly unique, go straight for Hyaena. It is unlike anything else in the genre.
And maybe save Lego for when you were feeling particularly adventurous or maybe masochistic.
Or just curious about historical missteps.
Exactly. Before we go, leave us with something to think about.
Well, looking at that 2025 controversy, I want you to consider this. Heavy metal was born as a genre of rebellion. Rebellion against norms, against authority, against polite society. In today's hyper-connected, hyper-moralized world, is a band claiming to be apolitical the ultimate act of rebellion? Or is it simply being entirely out of touch? Is ignoring the world the most metal thing you can do? Or the least?
Wow, that is going to keep me up tonight. Thank you for that. And thank you all for listening to this deep dive into the weird, wonderful world of Sadist. Go listen to the music, decide for yourself, and we will catch you on the next one.